ballroom shimmered like a promise too expensive to keep. Crystal chandeliers hung low over polished marble floors, scattering light across tuxedos and silk gowns as if blessing everyone beneath them. This was the annual Wintercrest Corporation Gala, an event whispered about for weeks, photographed for months, and remembered for years. Deals were born here, reputations were buried here, and tonight something else waited quietly in the air, holding its breath. Tina stood near the edge of the room, one hand resting protectively on the gentle curve of her pregnant belly. Her navy blue dress flowed elegantly, tailored not to impress but to endure. Comfortable, modest, almost invisible among the glittering excess. She wasn't here to be seen. She was here because Ben insisted. Ben. Across the room, her husband laughed too loudly. Champagne glass raised, surrounded by executives eager for his attention. Ben Whitaker, rising star, senior operations director, the man everyone said would be CEO someday. His confidence filled the room like smoke, thick and unavoidable. Tina watched him with a quiet smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Are you okay?" Susan asked softly, stepping beside her. Susan was Ben's younger sister, sharp-eyed and observant, the kind of woman who noticed cracks long before walls collapsed. She wore concern the way others wore jewelry, subtle, intentional. "I'm fine," Tina replied. "Just tired." Susan followed Tina's gaze to Ben, then back again. "You didn't have to come tonight." "I know," Tina said, "but sometimes you show up anyway." The orchestra softened. A gentle hush rippled through the room as the master of ceremonies took the stage. Applause followed, polite, expectant. Another speech, another toast, another celebration of success built on late nights and borrowed time. Then Ben's name was called. The applause this time was louder, warmer. Ben straightened his jacket, flashed his practiced smile, and made his way to the stage like a man who belonged there. Tina felt a familiar tightening in her chest. Not pride, not fear, but something heavier. Ben took the microphone, basking in the moment. Thank you," he said, laughing. "Wow, nights like this remind you how far you've come." The crowd chuckled. Ben continued, voice smooth. "Of course, success requires sacrifice. Long hours, tough choices, even personal compromises." Tina shifted slightly. "And speaking of compromises," Ben added, glancing toward her table, "I want to thank my wife, Tina. Pregnancy hasn't been easy for her, and I know dragging her out tonight wasn't ideal." A ripple of awkward laughter moved through the room. "She's always been sensitive," Ben said, smiling thinly, "but behind every successful man is a woman learning to adapt." The laughter grew louder, too loud. Susan's face drained of color. "Ben, stop," she whispered, though no one could hear her. Tina felt the room tilt, not from dizziness but from clarity. Every light seemed suddenly harsh, every smile sharp. Ben raised his glass again, unaware or unconcerned of the silence hardening beneath the applause. What no one in that room knew was that this night had never been about Ben's speech. It was about what came next. And Tina, still standing calmly in the shadows, already knew the gala would be remembered for more than celebration. It would be remembered for revelation. Applause filled the room again as Ben stepped down from the stage, basking in admiration like a man convinced the world existed to affirm him. He returned to his circle, accepting handshakes and praise, completely unaware that something fundamental had shifted. Tina felt it. Susan felt it. The air itself felt heavier, as if the chandeliers were straining under an unseen weight. Tina did not cry. That was what surprised Susan the most. Instead, Tina inhaled slowly, her hands still resting on her belly, her posture steady, her expression calm, almost distant. It was the kind of stillness that came not from weakness, but from resolve. "Are you sure you're okay?" Susan asked again. Lowering her voice, Tina nodded. "I've never been clearer." Susan studied her face, searching for cracks. She found none. What she saw instead unsettled her. A quiet certainty, like someone who had reached the end of a long road and finally recognized the view. Across the ballroom, Ben laughed again, clinking glasses with senior partners. He caught Tina's eye for a brief moment and lifted his glass in a careless salute, as if the comment he'd made moments ago were harmless humor. Tina returned the gesture with a small, polite smile. Ben turned away, satisfied. He had no idea that smile carried years of silence behind it. Tina remembered the beginning. Small apartment, shared dreams, cheap furniture that felt like treasure because it was theirs. She remembered late nights when Ben talked about changing the world and she listened, believing in him before anyone else did. When Wintercrest began to grow, she stepped back without complaint, choosing support over spotlight. And when the truth of ownership had to remain hidden, she agreed. It was supposed to protect their marriage. Tonight proved how wrong she had been. The master of ceremonies returned to the microphone. Ladies and gentlemen, before we continue, we have a special acknowledgement this evening. Wintercrest Corporation is proud to recognize a founding partner whose contributions have shaped everything you see today. Ben straightened, assuming the praise would circle back to him. He leaned toward a colleague and whispered, "Probably another plaque." Tina exhaled. "Please welcome to the stage," the host continued, "Ms. Tina Hale." The room stirred. Ben froze. Susan's eyes widened as she slowly turned toward Tina. "Did he just say?" Tina gently adjusted her dress and stepped forward. The walk to the stage felt longer than it was. Every step echoed with memories, meetings she attended quietly, contracts she signed under sealed names, decisions she made while letting others take the credit. Faces in the crowd blurred together, confusion spreading as whispers rose. Ben laughed uneasily. "That's my wife," he said to no one in particular. "Must be a mix-up." Tina reached the stage and accepted the microphone. The applause was uncertain now, scattered, unsure. She looked out at the sea of familiar faces, executives, investors, board members, and finally at Ben. He was no longer smiling. "Good evening," Tina said calmly, her voice carried without effort. "I wasn't planning to speak tonight, but after what was said earlier, I believe clarity is a kindness." A murmur rippled through the room. "I'm Tina," she continued, "and while many of you know me as Ben's wife, there's something else you should know." Ben took a step forward, panic flickering behind his eyes. Susan pressed a hand to her mouth. Tina met Ben's gaze, steady and unflinching. "I am the majority owner of Wintercrest Corporation." Silence felt like glass shattering, and in that moment, everything Ben thought he owned, his power, his pride, his future, began to slip through his fingers. But the truth had only just begun to speak. For 3 heartbeats, no one moved. The kind of silence that followed Tina's words was not empty. It was crowded with disbelief. Champagne glasses hovered midair. Smiles froze and cracked. Somewhere near the back of the room, a fork clinked against a plate, sharp and misplaced. Ben stared at Tina as if she had spoken in another language. That's not funny," he said, forcing a laugh that never quite landed. "Tina, this isn't the time." Tina didn't respond right away. She simply looked at him, not with anger, but with a sadness that seemed to age her in seconds. When she finally spoke, her voice was calm, almost gentle. "This was always the time, Ben. You just never expected it to be tonight." The master of ceremonies shifted nervously, unsure whether to intervene. Board members exchanged glances, some of them already aware, others piecing together long-ignored truths. Susan watched from her seat, heart pounding, as memory after memory suddenly rearranged itself into sense. Tina turned back to the audience. Wintercrest was built quietly, deliberately. From the first acquisition to the last expansion, the decisions came from one place: mine. A man near the front nodded, another followed. Recognition spread like a wave. Ben's face flushed. "You're embarrassing me," he hissed, forgetting the microphone was still live. "You could have talked to me first." "I did," Tina replied, "for years in ways you chose not to hear." The room leaned in. "I stayed invisible because I believed in partnership," Tina continued. "I believed respect didn't need an audience. And I believed love meant never needing to compete." She paused, letting the words settle. "But love also means not shrinking to make someone else feel tall." Susan felt tears sting her eyes. Ben shook his head, struggling to regain control. "This is ridiculous." Everyone here knows I run this company. Tina turned slightly and gestured toward the first row. Would you like to clarify that? One of the senior board members stood. Ms. Hale is correct. She holds controlling interest. All major strategic approvals route through her office. Another voice added, We've known since the beginning. Ben's breath came faster now. The room that once felt like a kingdom had become a courtroom. Tina faced him again. I never took credit because I trusted you. Tonight you showed me exactly how fragile that trust was. Ben swallowed hard. So what is this? Revenge? Tina shook her head. No, this is truth catching up. She placed a hand on her belly. I have a child to protect, a future to shape. And I will not teach them that silence is the price of belonging. The applause began slowly, hesitant at first, then building, growing steadier as understanding replaced shock. It wasn't celebration, it was acknowledgement. Ben stepped back, his reflection in the mirrored walls unfamiliar to him now, smaller, uncertain. Susan rose from her seat and joined the applause, her expression fierce and proud. Tina handed the microphone back to the host. Thank you for listening. As she stepped off the stage, the room parted instinctively to let her pass. Ben remained frozen where he stood, surrounded by people yet utterly alone, realizing too late that power doesn't vanish all at once. It slips, quietly, publicly, and without apology. And the night was far from over. The gala continued, but only in name. Music returned softly, hesitant, as though unsure it was welcome anymore. Conversations restarted in whispers. The sparkle of the evening dulled, replaced by something heavier, reflection. People smiled politely, yet their eyes kept drifting toward Tina, now seated calmly beside Susan, and toward Ben, still standing where confidence had abandoned him. Ben finally moved. He excused himself from the cluster of executives and crossed the room with stiff steps, every stride stripping away another layer of the man he thought he was. When he reached Tina's table, Susan rose immediately. I'll give you space, Susan said, though her tone carried warning. She squeezed Tina's hand before walking away. Ben lowered himself into the empty chair across from his wife. For a moment, neither spoke. The hum of the room filled the silence between them. You made me look small, Ben said at last. Tina met his eyes. No, Ben, I stopped making myself smaller. He scoffed, rubbing his forehead. You could have handled this privately. You didn't have to do it like that. Tina's voice remained steady. You chose the stage first. I simply refused to disappear on it. Ben opened his mouth, then closed it again. He looked around, suddenly aware of how many eyes had once admired him, and how many now saw him differently. I worked hard for this, he said quietly. I know, Tina replied, and so did I. The words landed heavier than any accusation. Ben's shoulders sagged. Why didn't you ever tell anyone? Why let me think? Because marriage isn't a competition, Tina said, or at least it wasn't supposed to be. She paused, then added softly, I wanted us to win together. Ben looked at her belly then, as if seeing it clearly for the first time that night. His voice dropped. And now, Tina said, I choose honesty over harmony and respect over illusion. Across the room, Susan watched quietly. She saw something change in her brother's face. Not anger this time, but understanding arriving too late. He nodded once, slowly. I don't know who I am without all of this, Ben admitted. Tina stood, placing her chair back neatly. Then maybe this is where you start finding out. She turned to leave. Ben didn't stop her. As Tina walked away, executives subtly stepped aside. Not out of fear, but recognition. Power, real power, had a different posture. It didn't shout. It didn't perform. It simply moved forward. Susan joined Tina near the exit. Are you ready to go? Tina smiled faintly. Yes, I think I've stayed long enough. Behind them, Ben remained seated, alone with the echo of applause that was never meant for him. And as the doors closed softly behind Tina, one truth settled unmistakably over the room. Some lessons don't arrive to teach, they arrive to transform. And the final reckoning was still ahead. The city was quiet in the way only late nights could be. Traffic reduced to distant hums, streetlights stretching long shadows across empty sidewalks. Tina sat in the passenger seat as Susan drove, both women letting the silence breathe. For the first time that evening, Tina felt the weight of everything settle, not as regret, but as release. You were brave tonight, Susan said finally. Not many people could have done that. Tina rested a hand on her belly, feeling a soft, reassuring movement. I wasn't brave for myself, she said. I was brave for what comes next. Susan nodded. She understood now. This wasn't about humiliation or victory. It was about legacy. At home, Tina slipped off her heels and sank into the couch, exhaustion washing over her. Susan brought her a glass of water and sat beside her. Ben's going to struggle, Susan said quietly. But maybe this is what he needs. Tina didn't answer right away. Her thoughts drifted back to the man she once knew. The man who held her hand in tiny apartments, who dreamed out loud, who promised partnership, not performance. I don't hate him, Tina said at last. That's the hardest part. Susan reached for her hand. Sometimes love doesn't end with anger. Sometimes it ends with clarity. Across town, Ben sat alone in a darkened penthouse, the gallery playing in fragments he couldn't silence. Every laugh he once enjoyed now sounded hollow. Every compliment felt borrowed. For the first time in years, there was no audience, only himself. He opened his phone, scrolling through photos he'd ignored for too long. Tina smiling quietly. Tina listening. Tina standing beside him while he stood in front. He finally understood something he'd spent years avoiding. Power given is fragile. Power shared is real. Back in her bedroom, Tina stood by the window, city lights reflecting in the glass. Tomorrow the headlines would run, opinions would fly, people would argue about timing, pride, and public moments. But tonight, this moment belonged only to her. She wasn't thinking about ownership anymore, or status, or applause. She was thinking about the kind of world she wanted her child to grow up in. A world where respect didn't require permission, where love didn't demand silence, where strength could be quiet and still undeniable. Susan watched her from the doorway. Whatever happens next, she said, you didn't lose tonight. Tina smiled, not brightly but honestly. Neither did he, if he learns. The city lights blinked on and off like distant stars, indifferent to pride and titles, reminding them both of a simple truth. When everything is stripped away, what matters isn't who owns the room, but who owns their truth. That night, the lights eventually dimmed. The music faded, and the applause, once so loud, disappeared into silence. But the truth Tina revealed didn't fade with the evening. It followed every person home. It sat in the quiet moments. It forced a question no one in that room could ignore. How many times do we underestimate the people who stand beside us quietly? How often do we mistake silence for weakness and humility for absence? Tina didn't raise her voice. She didn't seek revenge. She simply chose truth over comfort and dignity over approval. And maybe that's the most powerful kind of strength there is. So now the question is yours. If you were in her place, would you have stayed silent to protect the moment or spoken up and changed everything? Tell us in the comments. If Tina's story touched you, hit that like button and share it with someone who needs a little reminder that strength can be quiet but unstoppable. Don't forget to subscribe for more real, powerful stories that will leave you inspired. And comment below to tell us what you would do if you were in her shoes. Your voice matters, and we want to hear it.